Hello, in this video we're going to be looking at Otto Mesmer and Felix the cat. And I want to look at this pair for several different reasons. One is that it is a very important early cartoon character, Felix the cat, who would later go into comics. You can see part of a comic strip there. But also it's interesting because Felix the cat was this super popular, famous cartoon character that then kind of died and just went to comics. And there's a chance that even if you're into cartoons, you may never have heard of Felix the cat, even though he was this huge, big thing. In a sense, he was Mickey Mouse before Mickey Mouse. And so there's this kind of a question. Why is it that Mickey becomes so big, whereas Felix just kind of fizzles out? And it's important to understand that so we can see what was really amazing about what Walt Disney was able to do, as well as particularly the people who supported him. Because another theme we're going to look at here is this kind of community or partnership that you have to have in order to be successful in animation. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about Otto Mesmer. He was born in New Jersey, and it's important for us to understand this. He's born before Hollywood's a thing. And when you're looking at this early American history of cartoons and animation, there's going to be this shift from the East Coast to the West Coast, right? There's going to be this shift. So early on, when we talk about animation pioneers, we're going to be looking at the East Coast, right? So Otto Mesmer, he's from the East Coast. He's from New Jersey. It's not too hard for him to get to New York or to other areas in the East where animation is really important. And from a young age, he was interested in entertainment. He was going to the theater. When he could, he started going to movies. He was very interested in that sort of thing. Interested also in reading comic strips. He was especially inspired to be a cartoonist in part by the cartoons, by the films of Winsor McCay. Remember, he's the Gertie the dinosaur guy. And so he's developing this interest. A lot of it's artistic, but it's also financial. It's important to emphasize Winsor McCay was fabulously wealthy by this time. Not only did he have a beautiful home, I believe he had multiple cars, and he didn't drive them. Other people drove him around, right? So he had a chauffeur, right? So this, you think about this guy drew basically comic strips. He did animation on the side, but he was a big enough name, popular enough, that he was extraordinarily wealthy. And that attracted many people into cartooning, into animation. Now, Otto Mesmer will go on. He'll be an artist. He will go to art school. He's good at drawing. And he eventually ends up working at Universal for a time as an animator. They weren't taking it too seriously, and you can get the sense here that after they hired him, they gave him a desk outside, right? I mean, it's by this time he was working out west. Universal is in Hollywood. It was in California, so it was warm much of the time, but they gave him a desk outside next to a lion that they used in the studio whenever they needed a lion for a picture, a movie. And they apparently did not like to feed the lion much because when he would roar more because he was hungry. So they purposely kept they didn't feed this lion, so he would be angry and roar more. And that's where poor Otto Mesmer had to work. Now, he didn't work there very long because they closed down the animation part of their business very quickly, and then he was out of a job. But I do think that that's fascinating, and it shows you how early on there was this kind of interest in animation, but also doubt about whether anything would come of it. Now, I'm going to talk about this man more later, but Otto Mesmer is going to be hired by this fellow, Patrick Sullivan. And under Patrick Sullivan, working in his studio, Otto Mesmer will learn the basics of animation, right? So remember, Otto Mesmer is a artist, right? He's learned art, like two-dimensional art, but he hasn't learned animation much yet. He's taught himself a bit. Under Patrick Sullivan, he's going to learn a bit more. Now, they have developed, the Fleischers have developed the rotoscope by this time. Remember, that's that device that allows you to take a movie and then trace images of it, play it by frame, so you can trace images of it to create an animated cartoon. He didn't think it made sense to do that, though. Otto Mesmer rejected that because he said, look, why would I want to make animation imitate exactly what human beings are doing? I'll just take a movie, right? What's the point? He's still going to study movies to get an idea about how human beings move, but he wants to be able to exaggerate that. He wants to be able to add character to that. He doesn't want to just follow human motion exactly. Mesmer will be drafted into the army and fight in World War One, and he was like a frontline infantryman. He did experience the war. It's not too clear how it maybe impacted his work, but he did see a lot of death and destruction. He lost some friends up close and personal. After the war, he's of course survives the war. He's not wounded in any serious way, and he's going to be rehired by Sullivan. Right, so he'll come back. He'll get his old job back working for Sullivan's studio. And it's good here now to talk about Patrick Sullivan and just give you a general sense of the business environment. We need to recall that animation and success in popular culture isn't simply being good at art or being good at drawing. There's much more to it than that. And we're going to look at Patrick Sullivan here. So who is Patrick Sullivan? He was a former deckhand and boxer. He had a lot of different jobs. He actually, you can't quite see it there, but his ears and nose were actually kind of messed up because he was a boxer and was beaten up a lot. And he worked as an assistant eventually for a man who drew an incredibly racist comic strip. And I want to stress here, when I say racist here, what I mean by this is the comic itself was intrinsically racist. It wasn't, you have sometimes like Bugs Bunny, for example, appeared in a cartoon that made fun of Japanese people in a racist way. And you can just kind of delete that cartoon in a sense. It's not part of Bugs Bunny's identity that he, that in one cartoon he was racist. But this comic strip was based around a racist idea. Basically, just its main character was an African-American man, and it was making fun of him. So the whole comic itself was inherently racist. But the guy who created that comic strip was mentally unstable and burned himself to death. He set his house on fire and died in the fire. And then Patrick Sullivan inherited the racist comic strip and said, hey, I've got this racist comic strip. I'm drawing out, making money. I would like to make some more money off racism. So I want to learn to animate so I can make a cartoon out of this really racist comic strip. So Sullivan is really in this for the money. He would go work for a studio to learn how to animate, and he was fired from that studio for alcoholism, which is saying something because, as we'll talk about later, lots of cartoonists were drunk a lot of the time, especially at Warner Brothers. When Mel Blanc was hired by Tex Avery or given an audition by Tex Avery to do voice acting, Tex Avery was extraordinarily drunk, as were a lot of other people. It was like the middle of the day. So saying a cartoonist, an animator was fired for alcoholism, that's saying something because that was quite common. And in fact, Patrick Sullivan would continue drinking so much that it destroyed his mind, and that wasn't helped much by the fact that he also had syphilis. And this is as if this wasn't bad enough, while Otto Mesmer was out fighting World War I, Patrick Sullivan seduced a underage teenage runaway and sexually assaulted her multiple times and was imprisoned for that. It tells us something about the sexism of the age, though, and the patriarchy, that he wasn't in prison for very long because they said, well, he's got a promising animating career, so he should be given a short sentence, and the judge agreed with that. And I mean, even though he assaulted, like I said, sexually assaulted a minor, he was in jail for a very short time, where he continued to draw his very racist comic strip. So what's interesting is also as an aside, there's that's his wife there in that picture. That's Patrick Sullivan. He's the guy with the tie, and there's a woman sitting next to him. There's a really good chance he murdered his wife, right? They had an argument, and then she fell out of a window and died. So, pretty circumstantial good evidence that he killed her, especially because apparently she was having an affair with her chauffeur. In any case, my point here is not to just badmouth Patrick Sullivan. My point here is to emphasize how he was so very different from Otto Mesmer. As far as we can tell, Otto Mesmer's personal life was squeaky clean. He married his childhood sweetheart. They were faithful to each other. He certainly didn't murder her by pushing her out a window. He did not commit sexual assault or do anything like that. Otto Mesmer, the guy who actually fought in the war, was this very nice, mild-mannered person. And they become partners, and they are successful partners because Patrick Sullivan brings a lot of things that Otto Mesmer lacks. Patrick Sullivan was an aggressive, shameless self-promoter and salesman. Right? He is able, and these are things a mild-mannered person like Otto Mesmer is not very good at. Right? It's not enough simply to write and create a good cartoon. You also have to convince people to buy your cartoon. You're going to have people who will try and steal it. You have to be able to fight people who try and steal it, who are going to try and, copy your work and do other things. And you have to be there actively trying to sell your character. And Patrick Sullivan was good at all of that. And I'm not saying that to excuse all these terrible things he did. That's not my point. My point there was to show how we have these two very contrasting individuals and how in order to make animation work, these two guys had to figure out how to build a partnership that they could both utilize their strengths, right? Now, what's going to end up happening, so we need to now talk about the creation of Felix. The studio was very successful, and they were actually approached by an agent of John Bray, who was working for Paramount Pictures at that time, for material. Remember, John Bray was the guy who stole stuff from Winsor McKay and then tried to patent what he stole. So that's what I mean. As bad as a Patrick Sullivan was, you needed someone who was this kind of aggressive, tough guy in order to protect what you have, because people are going to try and steal it. But in any case, what's going to happen is John Bray's agent, a representative, is going to approach Patrick Sullivan and say, hey, I need some more material for Paramount. And they will agree that Otto Mesmer can produce some material for Paramount, though he has to give a cut to Patrick Sullivan, because Patrick Sullivan's a good businessman and says, you got to pay me. And what is going to happen is Otto Mesmer will create this cartoon called Feline Follies, which features this cat, Felix the cat. And what's going to happen is and I'm going to go through the plot momentarily, but it's a kind of a famous scene where Otto Mesmer shows it, and then John King, the guy who is the representative of Paramount who decides whether or not they're going to buy the cartoon, is just dying laughing through all of it. And then at the end of it, he looks at Otto Mesmer and says, make us another, right? Make us another. So that's the key thing, right? You got to have someone who can run a studio, who can produce material, who can make sure that all the work gets done. But you also have to have someone who's going to make something funny. And it's a pretty good cartoon in many ways. So as you're going to see, it's pretty adult, because what ends up happening is, there's Felix, and he likes this girl cat, and there he is courting her. He gave her a flower. And then they have multiple dates, and these are all very sweet, right? He says, I've only got 9 lives to live, and I'll live them all for you. Very sweet. You can see she's got a nice smile on her face. He pulls out his banjo and plays for her, and she dances very gracefully, and it's a wonderful animated section. But while Felix is away, the mice will play, right? There's the mice, and the mice basically eat all the food, and there's a very funny animated sequence where they take down this like giant chicken or turkey, I'm not sure what it is, and then they eat it. I didn't know mice ate turkey drumsticks, but they do. And then Felix comes home late from his date, and he's exhausted, and his owner comes back and sees that the place has been trashed. He's the cat, right? He's supposed to protect it from the house from these mice and other pests, but he's failed, so his owner is going to kick him out. And then so he goes to his girlfriend's house, because he says, I'll go live with her, and I'll be, she'll take care of me, everything will be fine. But he goes there and finds out that he's had a lot of children by her, right? He goes and see all these little mini Felixes, right? So what does he do? He runs away, and this is where it gets, already it's kind of adult. He runs away to the gas works, hooks a hose to the gas, and kills himself by inhaling gas. It's kind of messed up, and you certainly should not imitate Felix, but that's what happens in his first film. And this is what made John King laugh, and it said, make us another. And it's important, one reason I tell this story is that we need to understand these were not aimed at children. Now, kids could watch this and get a laugh out of it, though they may be kind of freaked up when the cute little kitty commits suicide at the end. But the key thing here is this is made for adults first and foremost, right? This is not a kid's thing at the beginning. But that's the first Felix cartoon. And to conclude, we need to talk a little bit about the connection between cartoons and capitalism. And again, this is where I want to just help us to understand why it was important to have a person with Patrick Sullivan's skills. It'd be nice if he had those skills without all the evil. Now, there's this argument about who created Felix. Was it Otto Mesmer or was it Pat Sullivan? Pat Sullivan certainly took credit for it, but it does seem like Otto Mesmer's the guy who made it, who first created Felix. And this shows us the power of studios, and it raises this question about the issue of ownership, right? Who owns a cartoon character? Is it the artist? But a lot of times the artist was working for someone, was getting paid a wage by someone, and they're producing it for somebody, right? If you make a car for Ford Car Company, or you're an engineer working for Ford Car Company, you don't get to say that that's your car, right? That's Ford's car that they can sell. So that's one way you can look at it. And this is something that's going to come up multiple times throughout this class. Who owns something? But in the end, or at first, Pat Sullivan owns Felix and will continue to own him in a sense, but Otto Mesmer will later get credit for creating him. But this again shows us these different skill sets, right? You have the artist creativity and the salesmanship of something like Pat Sullivan. Because on one side, we'll say, well, Otto Mesmer, he's the creator of Felix. He's the guy that came up with him. But in a sense, Pat Sullivan helped make Felix big. Right? That's something we have to keep in mind. A lot of times we say, well, who's the creator? Well, there's this person who creates, but then there's a person who develops. And a lot of times you're sharing ideas. And we'll talk about this again when we talk about Mickey Mouse. But let me give you an example. As much as I do not like Pat Sullivan, let me give you an example of what I mean about this guy being a salesman, about being so important for the development of Felix. So there on the right, you can see this woman, Ruth Elder, and that's her in front of her. Well, actually, I think it's a different plane. But she had an airplane called the American Girl. And Ruth Elder was an early female aviator, and she was one of these people who was trying to break records and became kind of a celebrity for this, right? It was, it was exciting. Here's this woman pilot who's breaking records and doing this sort of thing. And when she would fly, she carried two items for good luck. She carried a Bible and a Felix doll. So she actually carried a Felix the cat doll. And what ends up happening to her is her plane, in one of these, she's attempting to do like a transatlantic journey, and her plane actually crashes. Now, she's fortunate in that she is rescued, right? She's fortunate in that she's rescued, and so she survives. But she did lose her Felix doll. So Patrick Sullivan telegrams her, writes her a telegram, and it says, "Am all right, swam ashore, we'll see you, Felix." And then he sent her a new Felix doll with a letter that said, "I'm back." Right? This is brilliant salesmanship, because all this is in the newspapers, right? And it's just so clever. It's right. All these people are following this woman. It's exciting. She's trying to cross the Atlantic. Oh, it's terrible. She had a crash. And then Sullivan uses his knowledge that she's carrying a Felix doll to insert Felix into the narrative and send this really hilarious telegram and a new doll. This is just brilliant, right? This is going to get lots of attention for Felix. This is genius. And that's what I mean. This is not something that Otto Mesmer, I think, would have thought of to do. This is a very different skill set. And so you can see in Felix then this understanding that you don't just make a cartoon and make money from the cartoon. You can also make money from the merchandising. Right? People want to own, in a sense, that character in a very literal way here, right? They want to own Felix. They want to have a Felix they can keep with us. And it's interesting that she carried a Felix doll for good luck, because Felix in Latin basically means good luck. But also what's important, what made this merchandising successful, what made Felix successful, was that he captured a kind of jazz age spirit, this kind of wild, chaotic, exciting, fun-loving atmosphere. Right? That's a lot of times when we think of the Roaring Twenties, that's what we think of. And Felix represented that. And that's what made him so successful. But remember, I started this lecture with this kind of question. Well, why haven't we really heard of Felix, right? There's a good chance you've never heard of Felix. What's going on here? What happened to him? Well, he didn't really change with the times. The jazz age ended. He represented the jazz age. And instead of changing him, he kind of stayed the same. And in particular, as new technologies like sound were developed, Felix tried to stay the same. Now, Otto Mesmer might have been interested in changing him and made suggestions, but Pat Sullivan just said, nope, we're making money. Don't worry about it. Right? We're making money. Don't worry about it. Now, he'll stop making cartoons and some reboots. They'll try and have some reboots. They don't really go anywhere. He will survive in the comics. But when you think about it, in terms of the definition of the development of animation, at this point, Felix is kind of a dead end. Right? He shows that you can make a character that's going to be really popular, that will capture people's imagination, that will capture a time period, that will make people really rich because of that. But if that character stays stagnant, it all kind of falls apart. And that's something that Otto Mesmer won't be able to really develop. He doesn't, for whatever reason, a lot of it's because of Patrick Sullivan's management. He's not able to develop that. Walt Disney and Warner Brothers, in contrast, will be good at developing and changing with the times. Right? So we look at Felix the Cat for a couple of reasons. For several reasons. One is just he's important in and of himself. He's an early animated character. He shows us how you can be very successful, but to be successful, you need people with different skill sets. Patrick Sullivan is very different from Otto Mesmer. You needed both those skill sets. So like I said, it'd be nice without the evil. But also it shows that the importance of change and of being willing to change and develop with the times if you want to be successful and stay successful.